starting Sunday night, going through next Tuesday night, we're now celebrating, Jews around the world are celebrating the holiday of Sukkoth. The holiday of Sukkoth references the word sukkah, or sukkah, an Americanized kind of version, sukkah, which is this structure here. This structure is a sukkah. And Sukkot is the plural of sukkah. So it's really, now, what does sukkah mean? It means tabernacle, temporary dwelling, fragile shelter. Those are the potential meanings of this term. So this is the holiday, some people refer to it as the holiday of booths, because this is a kind of booth. During this holiday, we build these structures, we eat all of our meals in these structures. Some people learn Jewish sacred texts in these structures, and some people even sleep in these structures. Because the obligation on the holiday of Sukkot, as stated in the Hebrew Bible, which is where we get many of our Jewish practices, is to build Sukkot and to dwell in them. And so I would like to recite one of the passages from the Hebrew Bible where we are told to do all of this. And I'm going to cite from Leviticus, which is the third book of the Hebrew Bible, and it is the Commandment. You shall observe as a festival of the Lord for 7 days in the year. You shall observe it in the 7th month as a law for all time throughout the ages. You shall dwell in Sukkot for 7 days. All citizens in Israel shall live in booths, Sukkot, in order that future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in Sukkot when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. So the context. What is the context of this passage? The context is the passage is immediately following the people of Israel's enslavement in the land of Egypt. The Israelites were enslaved in Egypt for many years until eventually they cried out to God and God redeemed them. He took them out of Egypt with great signs and wonders. When they got out of Egypt, though, he directed them into a desert. So they end up in a desert, and then they turn to Moses and say, hey, now what? We're in a desert. There's no food, there's no protection. How are we going to live and how are we going to survive? This holiday of Sukkot is recognizing and appreciating how God helped the people of Israel survive during their decades-long years in a kind of nomadic period as they were journeying from the land of Egypt to the promised land of Israel. This structure that we have created today has certain laws that require it, I press counterintuitively, to be fragile. So what are some of the laws about building these structures, and how does it relate to the context of being in the desert? The walls cannot be permanent. They have to be easily taken up and taken down. What would have been nice is if we could put it up against that wall and just make a couple. That's unacceptable. Because that white wall is very strong, it's going to stay here. That would not make this a kosher sukkah. The walls have to be, like the wind might tear them off. Very fragile. You don't need 4 walls. You need at least 2 and some. 2 and some walls, so we did exactly that. 2 and some. And you need a roof. However, the roof needs to be built of plant material like leaves or wood mats. It can't be a tree. It can't be like, I'll just do it under a tree, because that's not something that you created. You have to kind of use wood, for instance. And what's perhaps a little surprising about the roof is you have to be able to see the sun through the roof, and it has to let the rain in, which is, very odd for a roof to say, please build me a roof that it rains through. Why? So why is this? Here's where we turn back to the historical context of the time in the desert. During the period of the desert, how did the people of Israel survive according to the Hebrew Bible? Well, how did they eat? Does anybody know in the desert how they got their food? Manna from heaven. God provided food. Okay, they're in the desert. There's the elements. There's enemy tribes, which we know about from the Hebrew Bible. How did they protect themselves from these? Clearly, they were not building strong stone walls and stone structures to keep them protected from the elements and from enemies. They had to build something temporary because they were nomadic. They'd build something, they'd erect it, and then they'd have to be able to easily take it down. And in fact, before we had a temple in Jerusalem, we had something like a very temporary, what's called an ohel, a tent, for the Ten Commandments. Similarly, we in the desert were building these fragile structures to protect us from the elements and from our enemies. And of course, it's obvious that this is not particularly protective. You wouldn't want to be in here during a hurricane. So what this reminds us, of course, is that this is not really what's protecting us. Just like in the desert, when God was providing the protection, creating these structures and dwelling within these structures is a reminder, an acknowledgement, gratitude that God is here with us, protecting us during our lifetime and especially during the holiday of Sukkoth. And it offers us a kind of glimpse into our own vulnerability, that we really are vulnerable. We may not think we are as we're living in our stone apartments, but in fact, it's a reminder that God is what is protecting us. And so with the Sukkoth, we celebrate God's care and protection to this day. To take this idea of God's care and protection a little bit further, in the book of Amos, the prophet Amos, who you may have heard of, he talks about a coming messianic salvation period. And one of the things he describes is that when salvation comes, the temple in Jerusalem will be rebuilt, and there will be peace in the land. And I'll quote for you how he describes that moment. On that day, I will raise up the Sukkah of David that is fallen, and repair its breaches, and raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as in the days of old. In the context of Amos here, the Sukkah is God's temple, and that God is repairing it. This is a temple that was destroyed, thousands of years ago, has not been rebuilt, and Amos is promising that it will be rebuilt, and he's referring to it as a Sukkah. And so God is promising that just as God, that Amos is promising that just as God indwelled in the temple, he will be indwelling in the Sukkoth in Jerusalem, but also, until then, we try to recreate God's indwelling in the Sukkoth of our time, yearly, as a reminder of the temple that will be rebuilt, and we welcome God into our dwellings, as if we're creating a home for you, God, such as was the Beit HaMikdash, the Jerusalem temple. Here, please enter our homes. We would like you to enter with us, and we recognize that we are in the shelter of your arms, as we are in this kind of fragile shelter. I mentioned that we build these Sukkoth. Interestingly, one of the requirements in building these Sukkoth is to celebrate and be happy, which is just an odd commandment. It kind of reminds me of the commandment of love God with all your heart and with all your soul, that, it takes some trying to understand. What does it mean to force somebody to have a feeling? The holiday of Sukkot, one of the commands is to be happy. You must be joyful, and in fact, it is referred to as a holiday of joy. Now, practically speaking, it is a little ironic because you're in Miami, Sukkot falls out, September, you're here, you're being forced to have all of your meals in the middle of the day, you're sitting, you're hot, you're sweating. It's not the easiest thing to feel so much joy. Same in Toronto. When it falls out late, You're freezing, you're shivering, and yet you're obligated to feel joy. What is that all about? How do we do the feeling joy? I can't answer how we actually feel joy under those physical contexts, but the point is we feel joy in our recognition that God is with us, that we've created a place for him to be with us and to protect us. In the ancient period, in the period of the Bible, there was a very particular way that we were supposed to demonstrate our joy. The holiday of Sukkoth falls out in the fall, always somewhere in the fall. It shifts a little bit because we're in the lunar calendar, but always in the fall, which in Israel is the harvest period. And so there is going to be a joy in collecting your harvest. The holiday of Sukkoth is also called a harvest festival. So one of the ways that we celebrate our joy in God during the holiday of Sukkoth is by celebrating God's harvest. And I'll just read for a moment. On the 15th day of the seventh month, you shall keep the festival of the Lord, that's what we're talking about right now, lasting 7 days, a complete rest on the first and a complete rest on the 8th. On the first day you shall take the fruit of the majestic trees, branches of the palm, boughs of Levi trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. There's that command to rejoice. You shall keep it as a festival to the Lord, 7 days in the year. You shall keep it in the 7th month as a statute forever throughout your generations. You shall live in booths for 7 days, so that the generations may know that I redeemed the people and they lived in booths when I brought them out, Sukkoth, when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. So, back then, in the ancient period, there was a celebration with the items of the harvest. So nowadays, we recreate that celebration using these items, each of these items. And if you were to go to synagogue during the holiday of Sukkoth, one of the unique practices during the holiday of Sukkoth is that people take this, which is referred to as a lulav, and I'll talk about it more in a moment, and people take this, and we hold them together, and everybody dances. They dance with these two items as a kind of reenactment of the joyful celebration of the harvest that was a commandment of the holiday of Sukkoth. That brings me to my final point, which is blessings. There are several blessings that we say on the holiday of Sukkoth. One of them is, I bless God for sitting in the sukkah, for dwelling in the sukkah. And we do that when we come and eat our food in the sukkah, which is what we do during this holiday. So before we eat our food, in fact, before we give our regular blessing over the food, we bless our sitting in this sukkah. So that's blessing number one. And for those who want to come out here and eat some of their food, we can do that blessing together. The second blessing that we do is on this joyful celebration. I'm going to just try to take this out. And you're also welcome to come here and do these blessings in celebration of God's harvest and God's protection, where we have several items here. There's a lot of metaphors about what each of these items mean, and in Jewish tradition, there's often not one answer, there's many answers, and they're not necessarily contradictory, they are iterative, perhaps. They build on each other. One metaphor is, we have this as part of our lulav, is the kind of branch. We have the aravim, which is the willow, and the hadassim, which I'm embarrassed to say, I forget the English term. But people notice that, hey, this kind of looks like a palm, like a spine. These, people say, might look like eyes. These look like a mouth, and thus in this resembles a heart. This is a metaphor that some people have proposed, a very old metaphor. And so in shaking, which is what we do to celebrate, in shaking these two items together, we're bringing our whole body together in joy, in recognition of joy of God's graciousness and God's protection. When we do this celebration, the first thing we need to do is bless the practice and bless the joyful celebration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it now, and then everybody is welcome. Whomever would like to is welcome to come, and I have it here to do the blessing as well. I always forget there's very particular directions. Because one of the things is that you're supposed to shake it in all the directions. Some say because God is in all the directions. So we start with this down. This is called the pitom, and it's very fragile. And in fact, if this breaks off, this is not a kosher etrog. So people are very careful with this. We start with this. And I say the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat lulav. And then I turn this around, and I shake, remember this, in front, as God is here, to the right, behind, left, up, and down. And now I've fulfilled the commandment of celebrating the harvest that God has given us. So that's all I wanted to offer during this holiday. You are welcome to eat, to take your food, which is what we do. We take our food and eat in here. If you'd like, you're also welcome to do the blessing, if you feel so inclined.